Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I've got a fascinating gentleman to introduce you to tonight. He calls himself the Chief Burnout Officer. Chief Burnout Officer. Michael Levitt, welcome to my show. How are you, sir?
I am great. Great to be with you tonight, Brian.
So why Chief Burnout Officer?
Well, we'll get into the story in a bit, but burnout is a huge issue and has been for some time. But ever since this pandemic started, burnout is increasing at dramatic rates. And the numbers that we're seeing across every sector, obviously healthcare is one of them, but there are many others, is really concerning to me. And it's one of those situations where we need to focus on this as a society. And it's basically the numbers that I'm seeing. We have a pandemic within the pandemic. The numbers of people that are burning out is astronomical across the globe, and definitely in Canada and the United States.
So this is what? Stress, overwork, mental health, what?
All of the above. Burnout is prolonged stress. You're emotionally, physically fatigued. You're just numb, basically. You're just so wiped out. You have no energy to do anything. You start losing the ability to do things that you normally could do, without any problem. And also it takes a toll on you, obviously mentally, but also physically. And when I share my story, we'll dive into how that happened to me.
Breakfast Leadership is your organization. Why Breakfast Leadership?
Two reasons. One, I love leadership. I've been a leadership junkie all my life, and breakfast is my favorite meal. So I thought if I'm going to launch an organization, I might as well like the name. So I came up with that. But also, you find with executives, and you know this, sometimes if you get people first thing in the morning before they get in the trenches of their daily jobs, you have a fighting opportunity to be able to talk with them and engage them, because once they get into work, then they're in leadership mode, and being able to get them out of that situation during the day and have a conversation around their stress, their burnout is not easy. So finding them first thing in the morning before they jump into everything, I found was a lot more successful in reaching those people.
So what is it you do? You talk to people, leaders of companies right at breakfast time?
Breakfast time, and I also speak at conferences. This year, by the end of this year, I would have spoke at over 30 events on burnout, work with organizations to help prevent burnout in their teams, and sometimes one-on-one as well. I do find that executives definitely need to do one-on-one because they're not comfortable sharing, they're burned out. Especially if they're a Fortune 500 organization. They don't want that to get out publicly, because if you're a chief executive officer or a CFO of a publicly traded company and it gets out there that you're burned out, that could tank the stock and cost billions of dollars in investments and everything else. So they're very quiet about that. So unfortunately, it's one of those things where you see in a lot of company websites, these are the companies that I've worked with. Well, I can't do that because, much like healthcare, I have to protect the identity of people that I've worked with and organizations as well.
How long have you been doing this?
I've been doing it for a little over 4 years now. I was in the nonprofit sector for a long time. I've had many careers. Started off in accounting, was IT for a while, and then went into healthcare and executive in nonprofit for a while. Had my year of worst case scenarios, which we'll dive into momentarily. And from there, after reinventing myself, the idea came that I needed to address this burnout situation that I was seeing everywhere I looked.
We're chatting tonight with Michael Levitt of the Breakfast, not the Breakfast Club, the Breakfast, what is it?
Breakfast Leadership.
The Breakfast Leadership. I think about one of my favorite movies of the 1980s, The Breakfast Club. So maybe
that was an amazing movie.
Well.
That's an amazing movie. I love watching that.
There's that one song, can't remember it, but the guy puts his hand up and it's sort of coming through all the problems that you've got in your life. And so maybe it does have a connection with your organization. Anyway, we're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Michael Levitt of the Breakfast Organization in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting tonight with Michael Levitt, Chief Burnout Officer of Breakfast Leadership Inc., not the Breakfast Club as I mistakenly suggested, but Breakfast Leadership Inc., who really focuses on burnout with leaders. And Michael, during our first segment, you said that you went through a year of the worst things that could ever happen to you.
Yes, back in 2007, I was hired as a healthcare executive just outside of Windsor. And I had zero healthcare experience. I had a lot of startup experience and business experience and IT and all of that, but zero healthcare experience. And I was hired to lead a new clinic in an area that was underserviced. And over a period of 2 years, I was working some really long hours, basically 6 a.m. to 11 p.m., 7 days a week for 2 years nonstop. And that eventually took a pretty significant toll on me, both mentally, but also physically. And doing a startup, and anybody that's launched a business or put a lot of time and effort into a working situation, they know there's a lot of long hours. But we never left that startup mode, or I didn't, because I didn't have boundaries in my life to shut off work and not. And I know we'll dive into this a bit, but I'm seeing a lot of similarities to what happened to me back then to what's going on right now with this pandemic. And we'll get to that in a moment. But fast forward to May of 2009, after working this pace for 2 years, it was a Monday evening and I was mowing my lawn, and gas prices were pretty expensive back then. And my lawn wasn't that big. So I had an electric lawnmower because my lawn wasn't that big. But the problem with this mower was really bulky and hard to turn. So I'm mowing the front and I get one row done and I turn to mow another row. And I felt this incredible pain in the center of my chest. I thought I pulled a muscle because that's what it felt like. And I couldn't finish mowing the lawn. So I was able to get the lawnmower back in my backyard. And I went inside, took some pain medication, and then the pain went away unless I lifted anything up with my right arm. I'm left-handed, so I don't tend to lift a lot with my right arm, but occasionally I do. And whenever I lifted it, that pain would come back. So that was persistent for several days. Now, fast forward to Thursday night of that week in May, I went out to dinner at a local restaurant and they had an all-you-can-eat special. And I took them up on that offer and pretty much tried to eat everything that they had. So fried, greasy, not good for you types of food. And then, of course, a couple adult beverages to wash it all down. So ate a lot more than I normally did. And I got home that night and went to bed, and I woke back up around 10:30 with that same pain that I had Monday night and throughout the week, but it was about 10 times worse. It literally felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest. So I was able to take some Tums and I finally went to sleep. Friday morning, I get up. That pain that I'd been feeling off and on all week was persistent. It wasn't going away. So I went into the clinic where I was working. And after about an hour, I talked to one of the physicians and explained to him what was going on. And he said, well, let me just listen and see what's going on. So he listened and he said, it's probably nothing, but why don't we run some tests just to make sure? So we had EKG equipment there. So I went back in the procedure room with the physician, one of our nurses, one of our assistants, and myself. And they're all laughing at this point. They're having a blast. And you're probably wondering, why are they laughing? Because their boss was taking his clothes off at work in front of his employees. I was as embarrassed as you could possibly be. I was red as a tomato, wasn't thinking about anything else other than here I am. They're making all kinds of harassment jokes and everything like that. This was, of course, before Me Too and all of that. But it was really embarrassing for me. Finally, after everybody was done laughing, they hooked me up on the procedure table and they ran the test and they looked at it and they were really perplexed. And they went, what in the world's going on with this? So they said, you know what, let's disconnect and we're going to reconnect everything, make sure everything's right, and we'll run the test again. So they did that and they ran the test and they got the exact same results. So they took the results, they faxed them to Hotel de Grace Hospital in Windsor, and Dr. Gina, who was a cardiologist there at the time, got the results and then called back and said, tell Michael to get his butt in the hospital right now and he can't drive. I had a pretty significant heart attack. I had 2 blockages in my left anterior descending artery, which for those that are familiar with that artery, they call that the widowmaker, because if you have blockages in that artery and you have a heart attack, you tend to die. Now, here we are in 2020, I'm still here. So I'm very thankful for that. But that set off what I refer to as my year of worst case scenarios. So after recovering from my heart attack, I had 17 weeks off to recover. I went back to the clinic and they wanted to go in a different direction. So they let me go. So here I am, heart attack 17 weeks later without a job. remember the time frame, 2009. Remember the Great Recession? Wasn't
exactly
not a great year. And of course, being in Windsor, across the border from Detroit, not a whole lot of jobs were around. Anybody that had jobs definitely weren't going to leave them. So it took me months to find a role. I went on so many interviews. I kind of felt like the 90s Buffalo Bills, always going to the Super Bowl, but never winning it. I came in second so many times on interviews. It was getting really frustrating, but finally found a role in Toronto. So that required a relocation from the Windsor area to Toronto. And after getting up here and working up here for a few weeks, my family was still down in Windsor while I was working and looking for a place to live up there for everybody. Get a phone call from my oldest daughter, who was 10 at the time, and she's crying. Like, I couldn't understand her, but finally I was able to get from her that the bank had come and repossessed our family vehicle. When you lose your job during a recession and you're on heart medication that was costing me $1,000 a month, needless to say, other bills take a back seat. Now, we had worked with all of our creditors, explained the situation, and they were all very gracious with giving us a period of time to, not pay bills. But unfortunately, that time ran out because there was such a big gap in me being able to get a new role. So that was pretty disheartening. Now, thankfully, we had a second vehicle, which I had up in Toronto. So fast forward to May 2010. So almost a year after the heart attack, we find a place to move to in Toronto. So we packed up everything, got everything moved up to Toronto, unpacked everything, and we realized that we had forgotten the bunk bed ladder. So I was going back to that area to visit with family and friends the following week. And I said, well, I'll swing by the house. I'll get the ladder and anything else that we forgot, because you always leave things behind. So I had the good visit with the friends, went by the house to go get the ladder and anything else, go up to the front door, open the screen door, and I see the hugest padlock I've ever seen in my life. You can't find this padlock at Canadian Tire or Home Depot. They don't sell them there. Only banks and foreclosure organizations have access to these locks. And there was a small sticker on the door that said foreclosure. So over a year, I had a heart attack that should have killed me. I lost my job during the Great Recession. My family car was repossessed and my home was foreclosed, all in 369 days. And all those things happened because I was burned out. My burnout created all of those scenarios. That's why I get so scared when I see people burning out, because I know what could happen to them.
How'd you get through it? Like, my God, what a bunch of terrible things to happen to any individual in a lifetime, let alone in 369 days.
Well, yeah, it was such a significant thing. The best way to describe it was kind of, when you get knocked down, you get back up kind of thing. And I'm originally from the Detroit area, so Joe Louis, boxer, all that kind of thing, you get knocked down, you get back up. And that was my approach on it, because I thought, well, okay, I had a heart attack, I survived. All right, what do I need to do to heal from this? Lost the job. Okay, what do I need to do? Find a job. Okay, car taken away. All right, well, we still have one car. We need to make sure that we're good with our bills and everything else so nothing else happens. And of course, when the house was foreclosed, it was obviously, a pretty big deal, but we'd already moved from there. And ironically, we were listing the house the following week. So I called a realtor and said, well, somebody else is going to be selling it, so you can work with them. But to go through each of those losses, and every one of those are huge, and thank you for acknowledging that. Every one of those are devastating losses. To have all of mine in a year was, obviously very frustrating. But when you're in the middle of it, like any type of storm, the best thing is just persevere and, okay, what do I need to do today? What's the next thing I need to do? What do I need to do next? And that was what was able to get me through it. I didn't use a therapist or anything like that. I do wish I would have, because I think it would have helped with my recovery a little bit faster than, what happened afterwards. But at the end of the day, I was able to work through all of it and learn from it, because I realized, especially when I'm laying in the procedure bed before the cardiologist put the 2 stents in my heart, and he's telling me, so you don't know how lucky you are to be alive right now. And that point I realized, okay, yeah, I am. So there's obviously something.
Just on that issue, it seems surprising that, and miraculous, frankly, that you had the first heart attack to appear on the Monday evening and it was Friday morning before you went to the hospital. So Was it a far worse heart attack on the Thursday evening?
Yeah, the Thursday evening was because I had the two blockages I had in the artery was one blockage was 60% and the other one was 90%. And this is a thin artery, not that any artery is really
So
big,
was
but
it not a heart attack on the Monday, but a stroke or just a warning or something?
it was a warning, and then the Thursday night was the
Was the
actual
heart
attack.
attack?
Yeah. Yeah, and I would, if I would have had it checked out, the test would, of course, have shown something wrong with it, and I could have had, the procedure done without going through, the heart attack on that Thursday evening. But I'm thankful for eating the big meal. But I'm sure it would have happened at some point. But unfortunately, it could have happened while I was sleeping, and then you and I wouldn't be talking right now.
Right. Yeah. And so therefore there's one lesson in regards to, the pain, the chest, the not able to raise your right arm, all those kinds of warning signals that you were being provided. But I come back to, so, you had the heart attack, you had the job loss, the car loss, the house loss. And you say that you just kept going, but what got you through it? Have you always been resilient? Was it your family? Was it yourself? What was it that got you through such a crappy year?
Yeah, it's definitely family, and it was definitely myself. My childhood was amazing. My parents did everything they possibly could to make sure that my brother and I had an amazing childhood. I'm very thankful for that. There was nothing that happened that was traumatic. But I saw, one of the things that my parents were always good at was, showing me life struggles. We didn't thankfully have many of them, but there were people in our family and around us that had struggles and whatnot, and they would show them to us, not to shelter us, but they would explain, okay, this is what's going on. Whether somebody had, was an alcoholic or had a drug addiction or things like that. My parents never hid those things from us. They would explain to them what we were seeing and some of the challenges and maybe some of the reasons why people were in that. But it was just a spirit of just overcoming any challenge that I faced. I was very successful in school. I did really well in school. Anytime I faced any challenges, I was able to get through it. I think that really helped. And I know some people really struggle with that. And I don't want to say they, play victim by any stretch, but they feel that they've been shorted in life and they accept it. And I completely can relate to that in some of those instances, because I could easily have blamed the fast food companies for feeding me bad food, or my former employer for letting me go, or the banks for taking my things away. But you know what? I was the blame in all of that. I took ownership in it and held myself accountable for it and said, okay, what do I need to do to make sure this never happens again?
So, frankly, probably a majority of the people listening after having a heart attack and losing their job, after they came back to write the startup, would frankly blame the company and play the victim, if not be the victim, not just play the victim. Again, why didn't you do that? What changed your attitude such that you weren't the victim?
I could have played the victim, but I realized that it wouldn't have changed anything. And it would have kept me into a state of feeling defeated and not moving forward. And I felt that I needed to move forward. I knew that I was no longer going to be working there. I needed to find someplace else to work. And obviously, I'll take better care of myself as well, because I didn't want to be on all of those medications. And as of today, well, actually a while back, I'm not on any heart medication. I've made the changes in my life.
So roll forward 369 days or whatever. And you said you went through a recovery. What was that recovery?
That recovery was doing a very deep dive into my behavior, my thought patterns, my beliefs, everything that led me to that year. It's like, what did I do that created those things? Why was I stressed? Why was I burned out? Why was I trying to do everything and work those long hours? What was I trying to prove to myself, or was I trying to prove to somebody else? What was going on there? And one of the lessons that I had learned, and this happens a lot with successful type A personalities, is I like to call myself a reformed people pleaser. I want people to do well in life. I want them to succeed. I want them to do great things. But unfortunately, I was not good in taking care of myself first before I would help somebody else. I use the analogy, and I get this from my mom, quite frankly. And I actually mentioned this to her not too long ago, saying, because she wanted to give somebody something and all that. And I said, Mom, for years, you've been cutting off your feet to give somebody your shoes. So you need your feet. You need your shoes. You can still help them and guide them, but you don't have to give so much where you're depleted. That defeats the purpose. And that's what I was doing. I was giving so much that I was depleting myself, and I wasn't the best employee. I wasn't the best dad. I wasn't the best husband. I wasn't the best anything, because I wasn't taking care of myself. And that's when I realized I need to take care of myself first. All right, what does that look like? What do I need to do from a dietary standpoint, from an exercise standpoint, from consumption of news standpoint? What am I taking in? What's important to me? Why is it? So for me, and I want to premise this right away, most people that burn out, they do not need to reinvent their life. I don't want to scare people like that. They're thinking, I don't want to reinvent my life. I just finally figured this out. For me, I needed to, because of all of those losses that I had. I never wanted to go through that again. So I took it upon myself to reinvent myself. And people that have known me for decades say, yeah, we know who you are, but you were definitely different than what you were, back then.
We're chatting tonight with Michael Levitt, the Chief Burnout Officer of Breakfast Leadership, Inc. We're going to take a break and come back more with Michael in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, we're back with Michael Levitt of the Breakfast Leadership Inc., an organization that helps people and organizations and leaders, particularly with burnout, because Michael has just shared with us his story of 369 unbelievably bad days where he had a heart attack, lost his job, lost his car, lost his house, but had the resilience and the fortitude to get through it all. It's a pretty compelling story, Michael.
Thank you. And a lot of times when I hear it shared like that, it's like, it kind of sounds like a country music song in a way, where you just had all these losses over and over again. And I didn't have a dog, I probably would have lost it there too.
If you had lost your dog, it would certainly be a country music story.
Definitely, yes.
So you've written this book, 365 Days. Mm-hmm. Tell me about writing the book.
It was very therapeutic for me. And my initial intent of the book was to share my story, because up until that point, which the book came out in 2017, and I've got a new book coming out in January called Burnout Proof, which goes deeper into the burnout, how to prevent it and all of that. But when I wrote 369 Days, it was to basically say, this is what happened to me. And because I wanted people to realize what happened. Even close friends didn't know all the stories that had happened. They knew some things, but they didn't know all of it. But it was very therapeutic for me to go back and revisit that time, because, that was in 2009 and 10, and I started writing it in 2016 and early 2017. So several years had passed. And during that time, I had reinvented myself, learned how to be a better executive, be a better leader, how to be better with people, how to have boundaries in my life to not burn out again. And writing this book, it was funny. I was looking at it, I'm like, I recognize that person, but that's not me now. So there was some challenges in there when I was reflecting back on the things, and I had to ask people that were close to me, do I have, not that I'd forgotten it, but I said, does this sound right as far as, the situation with the car and with, the job thing and all of that, just to make sure that everything was complete on it. But again, the premise of the book was, this is what happened to me. There's a lot of humor in the book. I make light of some things, and I give a little background into my upbringing and whatnot. But the purpose of the book was, this is what happened to me because of burnout, and how it's very scary to, flirt with burnout. A lot of people think, well, I'll work through it and it won't be a big deal. Well, I nearly lost my life and lost pretty much everything because of burnout. And looking at what's going on now in the world, we're in a pandemic. We've got job losses, financial crises, all kinds of different things, lockdowns, you name it. And there's financial impact on people, which causes stress. And when you have financial stress and other things are going on, that's when burnout can really start creeping up in people's lives, because it's prolonged. And COVID burnout is a huge issue, because we've been dealing with this for several months. For many of us, it feels like years, but it's only been since really March since we've been in the state.
Mental health issues are up. Alcoholism, supposedly, drug abuse are up. Breakups supposedly are up.
Yeah.
And at the same time, people are working longer because home and work aren't separated anymore. Their home office is their work office.
Yeah, there's no separation. And, a guest you've had on before, Leanne Townsend, she, divorce attorney, she's had one of the busiest years of her career this year, because the number of divorce cases are skyrocketing, because people have had to spend time together and they've realized that maybe they aren't the right fit for each other. But I agree with you. The mental health side of things right now is really bad. And my concern is, even once this pandemic is behind us, the post-traumatic stress from this experience, I think it's going to have lingering effects for many people for a long period of time.
Well, actually, it's interesting, because I've talked to a couple of different people about that. And remember what happened in the 20s. We had the roaring 20s. And so after the 1819 Spanish flu, 1918-1919 Spanish flu, people went nuts and partied like crazy. And it was the era of Great Gatsby and the big parties and the speakeasies and the roaring 20s. And so there wasn't post-traumatic. There was, now we're back to normal. Let's party like crazy.
Well, think about that. When we're able to freely go to things, concerts, going to Leafs games, or seeing the Raptors that'll play in Toronto and not in Tampa, these kind of things that I don't want to say we took for granted, but we did. We haven't been able to do them for a period of time. So when we get to do that, I anticipate that history is going to repeat itself again, and there's going to be a lot of people that are going to do that. But we'll see where things are when it comes to jobs and working remotely and working from home. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because one of the problems we've seen with this burnout is there is no separation from work or home, where before, some of us would get up in the morning, we'd get cleaned up, we'd get on TTC or Go, head into the city or head wherever we work. So we had that commute time, both in the morning and then when we left from work for the day. Well, now we don't have that commute time for many of us. So our commute is from the bedroom to the couch to the kitchen to the washroom, back and forth and all that. So number one, we're not getting as much exercise as we used to, because we're just not going anywhere. Secondly, we don't have boundaries around when we start working and when we stop. And of course, so many of us became full-time school teachers this year as well, because we had to teach our kids or work with the online school because they were home. So they normally are getting educated during the day when most of us are working. So what that's done is it's put in these blocks of time of work, which is actually extended into the evening, maybe on the weekends. So there are some people that I know are doing the 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. thing like I did back in 07, 08, 09. And that scares me, because it just wears everybody out.
So you've learned a lot about burnout. What are your suggestions to people? How do they deal with it? What are your recommendations?
First and foremost, you definitely, from a work standpoint, you need to establish boundaries around when you work and when you don't. And it's very difficult, I know, to do this, because with smartphones and laptops, we're constantly connected. So you need to set a firm start and end to your workday. Work with your employer. If you're an employer, work with your employees when that is, because you obviously still have things to deliver to your customers, your clients. But a wiped out employee or nearly killing an employee is not good for your business, and you're not going to be able to get something. So establish boundaries when you work and when you don't, and literally stop working. And don't worry, the work is still going to be there, but figure out what that rhythm is for you. And for some people, it's different, but definitely do that. Number two, get some activity in. I know even during the lockdown when we couldn't go outside very often, do some activity. There's no shortage of YouTube videos to do some light workouts at home. Just get some exercise, because when you exercise, that helps reduce your stress. And if you have reduced stress, it won't be prolonged and you won't burn out. Eating is another thing. So many of us, with the restaurants being closed and whatnot, have started cooking at home, which is great. That's a good skill for people that haven't done it before. You can experiment in some things. But focus on your nutrition, and I always recommend people working with a nutritionist or a dietitian to figure out the right foods for you, so you get natural energy and not the 2 p.m. coffee or the 5-hour energy, any of that stuff. Figure out what foods give you natural energy that match up for you, and when you do that, then you don't have the crashes and you feel better. Those are 3 big things that can make a big difference. And finally, your smartphone, keep it out of your bedroom. Don't use it as an alarm clock. Go buy an alarm clock and keep your room. And this is sleep is so important, because when we get good sleep, deep sleep, then our body repairs the damage that we do to ourselves on a daily basis. If we don't get good sleep, then your body doesn't have an opportunity to repair. So then today's damage gets piled onto tomorrow's damage, and the next day and the next day. And then you too get to understand what cardiology is all about and get to take medicines and all that stuff, which you don't want to do.
Okay, so some pretty good suggestions that are primarily in regards to fitness, health, and boundaries. Now, you also talked about reinventing yourself, and one of the things that I think a lot of people are faced with is layoffs, bankruptcies, closures, et cetera. Tell me about how you went about reinventing yourself.
For me, it was just figuring out, okay, what do I want to do? A lot of people are referring to this pandemic as a great reset for some people and some organizations. It's an opportunity to say, you know what else would I like to do? What am I interested in? What hobbies do I like? Do I want to launch a business? What would I do? And start thinking about that. Never stop learning is something we've always heard people say, which is great because, again, being online, there's no shortage of free courses. And I know with people with financial constraints and all that, signing up for an online course isn't easy if you have to pay anything, but there's a ton of free content out there to learn new skills. You could take a couple classes, see if you have an interest in it that could actually pan out. But like I said, most people don't have to reinvent themselves, but there are some adjustments that many of us have to make that created that burnout situation. Because I know people don't like hearing this comment, but burnout is a choice. Now, I didn't choose to burn out, but the choices I made led to my burnout. And that's what's happening with people that are burning out right now. There are choices that were made that created the scenarios for you to be in that state. Now, it might be short term. It might be a situation where you have a busy season at work or you've been laid off and there's financial strain and whatnot. But you have control of how you want your life to be. When you make a choice of where you live, what kind of car you have, all of those things, those are creating scenarios that you have to adjust to. So you have to be really careful on what you choose and figure out why you want that type of thing. I mean, I'm not being judgmental by anybody. If you want a brand new BMW or a new Lexus and you can afford it, go for it. Do it. If you want to live in a townhouse or live in a condo downtown or live out in the country, go for it. Whatever makes sense for you. But figure out what you want to do in life and establish goals. And when you do that and start focusing on those, you start actually feeling better about yourself because you got something to work for and work towards instead of just working and working and working. And of course, if you've been laid off, look for the opportunities that are out there. Look on the job boards. What positions are being hired? Are those some skills that you could pick up quickly? Well, then, invest some time in there and pick up some skills, and maybe you can find yourself in a brand new career. I know I've been in 3 or 4 different careers over my life, and I went into a new field having no experience in it, was able to become successful in it because I knew what I had to do in order to learn how to do it.
Like you said, it's an opportunity for people to figure out what they really want to do in life. And during your reset, you figured out what you said was important to you. A lot of people don't know how to do that. A lot of people don't know what is important to them. How did you figure out, or how do you recommend to people to figure out what's important to them, what their meaning in life is?
If you need time and quiet time to reflect, and in this busy world that we find ourselves in with constant connectivity and constant social media messages and constant everything, it's very difficult for many of us to just stop and reflect. and think about things. We try to multitask too much. And one exercise that I have organizations do and people as well is I call it the bucket list. It's different than the movie where these are all things you want to do before you die. But my version is list out things that you already do in life that you enjoy doing and list all of those things out. And then once you have the list done, to the right of them, write down the last time you did those things. And every time I give that talk at a conference or in an event or in front of an organization, I always hear moans and groans because people aren't doing things in life that they enjoy. And when they say they don't have time, that's why they're not doing them. If they have an iPhone, I say, oh, look at your screen time last week. How much did you spend on your phone? Oh, 6.5 hours. Do you think you could find a half an hour to go walk at that nature trail that's literally 5 minutes from your house? And they say yes. And it's like, do it. Schedule things that are singular that you can go and reflect and rest, whether it's sitting on your balcony or patio or going on a nature trail walk or just carving out a half an hour to journal and just mind dump things that come to mind and think about things. And the key thing, and I want people to remember this, please do not be hard on yourself when you're going through these exercises. We are horrible to ourselves. We don't love ourselves enough, and we need to. And when you do that in a non-judgmental way of listing things that come to mind, you'll start getting clarity. And once you get the clarity, then you can start seeing opportunities of things that you would like to do or potentially would like to do, and you explore them. Life is a big, practice session, quite frankly. And we have the freedom and the flexibility, if you take back control of your life, to do those things.
Some great suggestions from Michael Levitt of the Breakfast Leadership Inc. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute. Stay with us. We're back with Michael Levitt of the Breakfast Leadership Inc. Michael is a believer that you've got to figure out what burnout is all about. And you got to solve burnout issues. And he's given us a bunch of suggestions on how to deal with burnout. Michael, during COVID-19, people are going through some tough times. What are the suggestions that you have for these people that are stuck at home, frustrated with all the demands of work and homeschooling and not being able to go to a bar or restaurant or other events? What's your suggestion to them?
There's a lot of things that I know we haven't been able to do over these past few months, but there are still things that we can do. And that bucket list thing, I think, comes into hand where you can say, list those things that you still can do. And schedule those things first. Find time in your calendar to be able to do those things. And you can, because when people fill out these lists and they show them to me, there's a lot of things on there that cost less than $20 or are free and would take maybe half an hour to maybe an hour to do. And we can all find that time to do those things. So figure out what those things are, do them. If it's having, if you like going to coffee with a friend, you can still do that. Physical distance, of course. You can sit in a parking lot, maybe, both in your cars to talk. I've seen a lot of people doing that in a Tim Hortons parking lot or anything else. A lot of people are doing that. But make sure that you're doing things every day and every week that you enjoy doing, not just all work and yes, the school and all of that other stuff that we get to do because of what's going on in the world. But make sure that you put in some things first that are really beneficial to you and gives you something to look forward to, and just makes life fun, and that's the thing. Look for those opportunities of things that you can do to enjoy life, because believe me, life is fleeting. It flies by so fast. We look at this year and some people feel that it's dragged on. I'm confused and going, how in the world did we get to this month already? It's one of those things where just, take every day as a gift and look for those opportunities to do things in life that you enjoy doing and schedule them and do them. Don't cancel them.
Some very good suggestions, Michael. If people want to read your book or connect up with you from a speaking standpoint, how do they do that?
Best way is go to breakfastleadership.com. My email is michael@breakfastleadership.com. More than happy to have a conversation. There's a bunch of free resources on my website. Just go to the tools and resources link, one of the links up at the top. The bucket list thing that I talked about and a variety of other things are on there, all free. Just name and email and I'll get that information to you.
And the book is 369 Days to Survive?
369 Days, How to Survive a Year of Worst Case Scenarios. And then I've got a new book coming out in the new year called Burnout Proof that goes into a deeper dive of what we talked about today. So I'm looking forward to getting that out in the wild as well.
Well, Michael, I've been following you on social media for the last little while. I really appreciate getting to meet you in person, and I appreciate your suggestions and comments. It sounds like you really have gone through some of the worst times that any person could possibly go through, and you came out the other end with flying colors and reinvented yourself and have solved your burnout issues and are now contributing back to society. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
We're going to take a final break, and I'm going to come back with my closing comments in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, what a fascinating evening chatting with Michael Levitt of the Breakfast Leadership Inc. About his suggestions. And my gosh, what an incredibly compelling story that he went through. I do think that, a lot of us don't need to go through what Michael went through to get the wake-up call. And so his ideas about burnout are things that we should be cognizant of and listening to. But I also think that, his comment about the Great Reset and COVID-19 is really well worth considering. And I'm going to give you 4 suggestions, if I could, about, what you can be thinking about this year. Number 1 is to reach out. I think this whole idea of social distancing was garbage. Physical distancing, yes, we may have needed to have, but don't be socially distant. And so one of the things that Michael did say is that his family got him through things. I think family, friends, contacts are critically important. You can't get through the toughest times by yourself. You need some help. And so therefore, reaching out to some people and making sure that you've got those friendships, those family relationships, and frankly, some of those sort of, less close friendships, because if you lose a job, if you go bankrupt or whatever happens in life, you'll need those relationships. Reach out and touch people, even if you can't touch them physically, touch them with your words. Then he talked about trying to figure out what's important about you. And I think the best way to do that is write your eulogy. If you write your eulogy and you're saying something very different than what you're actually doing, that tells you something. Or if you write your eulogy and you hate what someone might say about you, change your life. And the third thing is that someone confronted me with this past year and asked me, Brian, what is your legacy? Michael's legacy is talking to people about burnout. What's your legacy? And I think if you're not happy with what your legacy is, change it. And then the final thing is, I do think that this is an opportunity for whether it's a pivot or a reset or reinventing yourself. There's no better time than Michael in 2009, the Great Recession, or now the COVID-19 epidemic, for us to take the time to be creative, to think about who the future self of us is going to be, and to go through that reinvention and try something new. Anyway, so a couple of ideas to add on to what Michael had to say. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM, or streamed online at www.saga960am.ca, or my websites and podcasts and videocasts on briancrombie.com. Good night.